Well, good afternoon, everybody, or morning, or whenever you're watching this. So, a couple weeks ago, our church asked people to take a couple of minutes and make a video, like a testimonial video. And so it's taken me this long to figure out what I want to say. Just during this pandemic and everything that a lot of people are facing, a lot of it feels really familiar to me, because I went through a lot when we had the housing bubble burst, or whatever you want to call it. So what I wanted to do was take a few minutes and create a video of me kind of sharing that testimony and kind of how I came through it and what I did, to survive, how God interacted in my life to help me survive. And so I want to take just a couple of minutes and share that with you. And I hope that this will be something that maybe will encourage you, or maybe will encourage somebody you know. I want to start by kind of explaining where I was in my life in 2007 when the housing bubble burst. So I had started a subcontracting company in 2004, and I had, it had grown pretty well. By 2006, we had our biggest year in 2006, and 2007 was shaping up to be a really amazing year. And so, because 2007 had been so well, and 2006 had done so well, in 2007, at the beginning of the year, I made some pretty big moves financially, and it involved us moving into a really huge house here in town, 3,000 square foot dream home. And within 2 months of getting that home, the bubble began to burst, or did burst. A lot of people say 2008 is when it crumbled, but for me it was 2007. And within 2 months of moving into that house, it burst, and a lot of the work, $1 million worth of work that we had lined out for that year, crumbled right in front of us, came to a screeching halt, ended. So many things that we had lined out stopped. And in Kansas City, the new new housing permits went from 11,000 a month to 1,100. So there was only a little bit of cheese and a lot of rats, so to speak. And so within 2 months of buying a really expensive, beautiful home, everything came to a close. And I knew at that time that we were in trouble, that we were going to lose the house for sure. And I didn't know how I was going to tell my wife. And so what I ended up doing was, I did a lot of crazy stuff to try to save the house, went into a lot of debt to try to keep the house and trying to keep my business afloat. And because of that, ended up in experiencing a lot of depression. And this depression was real, and it was deep. And if you've worked in the medical field, or been around mental health, or had even a little bit of training about mental health, when somebody says they think they're suicidal, you always ask them if they have a plan. And if they have some kind of a plan, that could be an indicator that they are a little more serious. And I had a plan. I had a big life insurance policy, and I knew how I was going to end my life so that my family could have all the money that they needed to pay off the big fancy house that we had. And I was gonna do it. I really was. And so I started to get scared, as you can imagine. And so I, maybe about a year into the bubble bursting and everything, I really knew that I was depressed and having a lot of anxiety, and still feeling suicidal. So I went to see my doctor, and my doctor put me on something for anxiety and depression. Now, I want to say right now that, since that time, I've worked in mental health for 4 years, And I can say unequivocally that if you're somebody who needs to be on some kind of medication to help with a chemical imbalance, to help you with any kind of seasonal disorder or bipolar or anything, stay on your meds. But now that I've done mental health and I'm more familiar with a lot of the medications and stuff, and I know the medication my doctor put me on, it was not the right medication for me. It wasn't the right medication for somebody in my situation. And I can get off on a big tangent right now, but so I was really feeling uncomfortable on this medication. It just took away my energy to do anything, to care. I just didn't care. And I didn't want to be somebody who didn't care. So in about 2008, I went to church one day. It's not at New Life where we go now. It was our church previously. And so we were at church on a Sunday morning, and the pastor, in the middle of the service, Pastor Kevin McMullen, he stopped the service and he came down, and he stopped in the middle of the service and came down to talk to me and said, "Benny, get out of here." Sorry. And he said, I have something I have to say to somebody. And he came down and he whispered in my ear, and I can't remember all of it. In a moment like that, you're a little overwhelmed. It's not something he ever did. We went to that church for 6 years, and he had only did that one time, and it was with me. But he quoted, I'll never forget the scripture that he quoted over me. And it was a scripture out of Genesis. He more or less referenced it. And he said that I would end up, I would be a little bit like Joseph. And he named his son Manasseh because God helped him forget all his worries. And so when the pastor shared that with me, I thought that was a sign that my business was going to get saved. And without really studying that passage very well, I just began to move forward with my life going, okay, things are going to be okay. I'm going to, the business is going to get saved. All I have to do is stay the course for that. And so, I feel like God continued to kind of have these moments with me, trying to wake me up. I remember going to church on a Wednesday night. I was still on my antidepressant medication, but I didn't like this feeling of not caring, so I went to church on a Wednesday night, and just God really got my attention that night. And I went home and I threw all those pills into the trash, and I said, God, I want you to be the one to bring me through this, not any type of a chemical or medication that I don't feel is a good fit for me, but it's you that I need. And so God just brought a lot of things to me. And so during that time, that was 2008, over the next 3 years, I still fought like crazy trying to save my company. And what I want to share with you here for a couple of minutes is what I did during that time, that it might not have saved my company, but it helped me survive everything. Because as I started moving past my company, and when I could tell I was going to have to shut it down, and then I decided that I needed to go back to college. So at 38 years old in 2011, I went back to college and started that all over, and was a full-time student, because that's what I felt like I needed to do. I decided that it was an income problem that I was having, and so one thing I want to do is I want to reference a few books that I read during that time, because I think the big overall message that I want to send in this video is the importance of intentionality in our lives. That, as a business mentor friend of mine once used to say, is plan your work and work your plan. And that means to have some kind of a plan. God may come in and move it. He may change it on you. And what worked for me may not be what works for you. And so this isn't really about, you need to, we see a lot of stuff online, this is your chance to start your business or whatever. I'm not here to preach any of that. I think that's between you, God, maybe your family, close counsel that you have in your life. not necessarily from me. If you want to get with me and you want to talk with me about something, I'm able and available to do that. But 2008 to 2010 was a life-changing period in my life. We did end up moving out of that house and had to short sell it. When that finally all came to an end, I ended up in major debt to credit cards and then the IRS. And I make a joke that if you're somebody who doesn't know how to do a budget, just get to where you owe the IRS money and they'll come and do a budget for you. They'll help you do a budget. But I want to reference a few books that I have here with me that absolutely changed my life and I believe were pivotal in me surviving that major economic downturn, because I know there's a lot of people maybe who could be watching this video right now that you're suffering an economic downturn, and maybe you've lost your job, or you've been laid off for a long period of time and money is scary, and maybe you're in a situation where you're struggling with your mortgage or just making ends meet, putting food on the table, whatever it is. But I want to share with you 4 different books I read. One thing I want to make sure that everybody understands is that I'm not this big fancy spiritual person. I'm just sharing this out of my own experience, what happened. I think I'm like a lot of other men and women out there, that I have my high points spiritually and I have my low points. And every day and every week and every month is different. I go long periods when I'm really in the Word and really stand on it, and then I have periods where I'm not in it like I need to be. So I think, you're talking to a normal guy. Well, depends on how well you know me, if I'm normal or not, but you're not talking to somebody. I don't see myself as a big spiritual success and in the Bible every day like I need to be. I think I'm your normal Christian person who just struggles day in and day out to make sure we prioritize things right. So I want to start with probably, some of the most important books. These are 4 of them that I just felt led to maybe share with you. And forgive me, I don't necessarily have some of these books. This is the Dave Ramsey Total Money Makeover. I didn't know a thing about managing money. I would have this book, but I gave it away. That's what I do with good books. But I don't know where I'd be today if I had not read this book. It's a quick read. It doesn't take any time at all. But I would really encourage you to read this real quick, because right now, if you have a lot of debt and you're scared and you're not sure what you're going to do next, piling more debt on it isn't going to help. Take some time, get this book, and read it. It'll make a difference in your life. The next one I want to show everybody, that I would encourage everybody to read, is The Traveler's Gift by Andy Andrews, okay? This book absolutely changed my life. It's like a fictional story, almost allegorical, but it's, I don't know about allegory, but it's a story about a man who goes on a journey and meets 7 different historical figures and learns a truth for success, that if somebody could implement these 7 different decisions into their life, they're more likely to be successful. And I read this book in 3 days, because the main character was at the bottom, looking up, piles of debt, not sure what he was going to do next. I read this book in 3 days and it encouraged me so much. So I would encourage you to get The Traveler's Gift by Andy Andrews, okay? The 3rd book that I read that made all the difference in my life was In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day by Mark Batterson. Many of you have probably heard of this book, but it's another quick read. All of these are pretty quick reads, because I was not a big reader at the time. I just decided I'm going to have to do something different if I'm going to get different results. And this book, In a Pit with a Lion on the Snowy Day, taught me what it means to chase a goal until you reach it. And so if you don't know the story about, what In a Pit on a Snowy Day, it's about a man named Benaiah who was one of David's personal guards or soldiers in his army, who literally chased a lion into a pit on a snowy day and killed it. He came out and the lion did not. And it's just a phenomenal book. It's one of the books that really launched Mark Batterson into the public, arena when it comes to being an author. So there's that one. My papers are getting away from me. And then finally, the final one that really made a huge difference for me was Joyce Meyer's book, Never Give Up. So I know there's a lot of people out there that, oh, Joyce Meyer's, oh, woman preacher or whatever. I would encourage you to put that away, put that mindset away, okay? Because referencing Joseph again, even Pharaoh realized he could get advice from an unusual, unexpected resource. And there's people here who would not want to read anything by Joyce Meyer for whatever your reasons are. But Pharaoh listened to a guy who had just spent 13 years in prison. So I don't, you got no excuses. This book is full of scripture. So you can't go wrong with a book that does nothing but reference God's word through the whole thing. And it's just about not giving up, because believe me, I wanted to give up badly. And I had to just start filling myself with positive things, no negative things. I found several preachers, national preachers besides my own preacher, which was very important at the time, and the help I got there at ICC, and then that bled into me being at New Life and getting the same, getting great help there emotionally and spiritually. But the importance of just pushing through, having a goal, focusing on that, very important. And these books made all the difference in the world. So yeah, I almost lost track, but I was really focusing on only positive things. And so with all the fear and anxiety that's going around right now, I would challenge you, if you're really struggling with anxiety, the wrong kind of information being pushed into you or being taken in by you, being lots of negative and not bringing in things that are positive and encouraging, can really get you going into a spiral into the wrong place. And I mentioned intentionality, but I also mentioned the importance of leaning into our faith, because I didn't at first for that first year of the downturn, but as I moved forward and got really started to become more intentional about my life, I definitely got where I was leaning into my faith instead of leaning away. Instead of saying, I can't believe this is happening to me, things have to be better than this, I started just focusing on my faith, focusing on my family, and God just walked me through it, some of the most insane things that had happened. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. I have a couple of verses that I think really help in this situation. The first one is back in reference to Joseph and him naming his son Manasseh. So Joseph, everybody's probably very familiar with this, and I should have read this right away when my pastor referenced it. I just focused on the fact that it was all going to be fine and I was going to forget all my trouble and the business was going to work, but I didn't really get into the story of Joseph as much as I needed to until a couple of years later. So the interesting thing when you read the full story of Joseph in Genesis 35 or something is where it begins. I don't know, you can find it. But every single time something bad happened to Joseph, the writer of Genesis, Moses, would say, but God was with him, and here he is being sold into slavery. God is with him. And he's accused of raping, Potiphar's wife, but, Potiphar, right? But the Lord was with him, and then he gets thrown in prison and, and it keeps saying the Lord is with him, the Lord is with him. And you'd be thinking, oh, the Lord's with you, bad things don't happen, right? And that's just not true. I think we're witnessing that now, that bad things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, good things to good things to bad. Getting a little dry. But when Joseph had his son Manasseh and named him Manasseh, that says God is making me forget all my trouble, which means it's over. It doesn't mean I can't remember it, obviously. It means it's over. Joseph was 37, okay? He was 17 when he was sold into slavery by his brothers. He was 30 before he ended up in front of Pharaoh. And then 7 years after the 7 years of good that he helped manage storing up all the grain was when he actually had Manasseh and named him. Okay, so that's 20 years. That is 20 years before he had his quote Manasseh moment. Okay, so I don't mean for this to be not encouraging, because the fix to this might not be right around the corner. Okay, but it's about the journey, right? It's about what we become when we get there. One of the big truths that I think is in A Pit with a Lion is when Mark Batterson says God doesn't care, where you're exactly headed. He cares about who you're becoming as you get there. And so this journey for me, it took many, many years. I mean, I tried for 3 years to save the business. Then I went to school, and that took 3.5 years. And so it was many, many, many years. It was a decade before I got back on my feet. But it's who I became during that time, and it was with intentionality. It was with leaning into my faith instead of leaning away from it that I was able to survive that. So, so just to read this one quick verse is has to do with Manasseh in my Bible. Okay, it's Genesis 41 verse 51. And it just says, Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and in all my father's house. So that verse, I think there could be people in two different kinds of situations right now. If you're essential worker, you're working and the money is coming in, and then you get a little bit of a bonus from the government. But if you're not an essential worker and you've been laid off, money's not coming in, and you're getting money from the government, but I kind of doubt it's enough, and so for those of you who are not the essential worker and you're frightened right now, I completely understand. I've been scared to the point of suicide, so I understand. But I really believe if you can develop some intentionality, if you can lean into your faith, avoid the negative news, avoid negative input. Maybe you do need to evacuate Facebook for a while or start hiding those negative people. You can go hide. You don't have to unfriend them. You can unfollow them. Unfollow those people. Make sure you are bringing positivity into your life. The other verse that I want to share is actually from Deuteronomy 15, 7 and 8. And I think this is really important. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit. And it's, if there is among you a poor man of your brethren within any of the gates in your land, which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother. But you shall open your hand wide to him, and willingly lend him sufficient for his need, whatever he needs. So there are a few people, they would not want to be named on Facebook, and I'm not going to name them, but they know who they are. There are a couple different people who played a major role in us surviving financially through the hard time that we had. We had a family that gave us a certain amount of money each month for a whole year when I was in nursing school to help us pay for groceries. And then we also had another friend who gave us a significant amount of money right before I finished nursing school so that we could have a Christmas for our kids. So I believe there are two roles that exist out there in our communities right now. And it is the role of the people who are being beat down right now financially and career-wise, who need to press into their faith. They need to become intentional. They need to put a plan together of what they need to do next, and that is between them, God, a counselor if they have one, their family members, husband, wife, whatever that may be. And then there's the folks who are not as affected by all of this, who are essential. And it is our responsibility. I actually have this responsibility this time instead of being broke and desperate is to be aware of the people around us that we can help. And there's not a certain dollar amount that goes with that. It doesn't even have to be a dollar amount. But are those of us who aren't as affected financially and safety-wise, maybe safety is the wrong word, but what can we do in our community to help lift other people up as they are trying to find their way through all these challenges? Because there's a role for both. I really truly believe that. And Julie and I have already had opportunity to help other people because we have the means to do it. And we didn't have the means to do it before. 12 years ago, we were as broke as anybody, moving out of a $300,000, 3,000 square foot home, all six of us into a 1,600 square foot, 3-bedroom house. Everybody sharing a room, right? Double up everywhere. And so we're in a completely different place now. And it is obviously God's grace, but then, we still have a purpose here. There's still something to be done. And that was one thing that I learned from Andy Andrews in reading his book, is that if you are breathing, if you are alive, God has something for you to do. Your work is not finished. It doesn't matter about your age or your situation. There is something that you can do. God has work for you. And so that's what I have for you today. Would you be willing to share this? I'm going to make sure when I put this on Facebook that it is public. And would you be willing to share this around to other people, and maybe it'll offer a word of encouragement to somebody else who's out there, or at least maybe provide them with a little bit of a path they can get on with intentionality and leading into their faith and not leaning away from it, to get help if they're feeling depressed or anxious or sad or fearful, to push away the negative things and cut back on how often you watch network news, because it's going to stir you up, and take it carefully, be intentional, be thoughtful about what you're doing, because there's something for you in the future. You can have your Manasseh moment, or you can be the support to somebody else who's on that journey. And I want to encourage you to be that. Be one or the other. Be intentional, leaning in, or support, encourage somebody who is. Thank you.